I don't want to describe what kind of torture they had to endure for the simple reason that they were Christians. It was horrible. In Eastern Europe, they resisted communism through their Christian faith. I think there is an entire lifestyle that has been built around this idea of maximalism, but I disagree with their understanding of maximalism. I think it should be about maximizing what Bitcoin does. Unfortunately, every form of money that we have ever known has become a religion. People need to believe what they're holding has value.
Cash rules everything around me.
Exactly, Wu-Tang.
It's all about the Benjamins, yeah.
The Bitcoin influencers figured this out and wanted to establish a culture for this. To some extent, I respect it, but I can't worship money. Money is just a means to an end. They need a culture change for Bitcoin.
We are joined today by Vlad Costea. He is a Romanian Bitcoiner and he's host of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast since 2019. He's also a writer and has written for Bitcoin Magazine and Crypto Insider. So I think our conversation today is probably going to be somewhat unconventional by Bitcoin standards, at least. But I think it's going to be super interesting. So for those not familiar with our podcast, maybe some people coming from Vlad's listeners, our goal on the podcast is to host the Christian conversation in Web3, which I know right off the bat isn't going to bring a super positive response from some of the more Bitcoin-focused listeners. But I would say, nonetheless, we definitely believe that Bitcoin is probably the most important topic in this decentralized space, for lack of a better word. And so we all here have a very strong interest in seeing it succeed. So before I hand it off to Vlad, I just wanted to kind of bound the conversation a little bit for our listeners, since the topic is maybe slightly inaccessible. But we all on this podcast are Christians. Brandon, Matt are Catholics. I'm a Protestant. I won't speak for Vlad, but I understand he was raised Romanian Orthodox. Maybe he can tell us more about that. But the topic today is really twofold. We're kind of curious about his perspectives, or broadly speaking, the Eastern European perspectives on Christianity, which might differ from some of the ways we think about Christianity here in the West. And then the second part of the conversation has to do with Christianity and Bitcoin and how all of these things kind of play together to create the culture that is Bitcoin, I guess, broadly speaking. So let's just pop it over to Vlad. How are you doing today, Vlad?
Hi, guys. I'm very happy to be here. I actually looked forward to this interview because it's so different from the ones that I usually do. It's not centered around explaining what Bitcoin is. It's not centered around promoting my own project, even though I do have a magazine, and if you want to check it out, it's on sale on ellenbits.com in their web shop and on shopandbit.com for Europeans. And you can also download the digital version for free, and it's open source, so you can print your own. But anyway, also subscribe to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. And I'm done shilling. For the rest of the episode, let's talk about Christianity and Bitcoin.
We usually give you an opportunity to shill at the end too, so you'll get at least one more shill in there. But feel free. But okay, great. So let's get your story. How did you come to Bitcoin? Why are you in the space? What's your mission here? And tell us about the Bitcoin Takeover project, because I know it's more than just a podcast. You said you do a magazine as well. Maybe you do some other things. So we're just curious to see what your project is all about and what brought you to it.
So what brought me to Bitcoin, first of all? I read about it for the first time by myself in 2013. It was on some meme page that's called 9gag. Not the most Christian page, by the way. But it's pretty offensive sometimes. And I was an edgy 21-year-old in university. And I saw a meme about Bitcoin. And I was like, what's this stupid thing? And I read a bit about it. I think I opened the Wikipedia page. And I was like, this is dumb. Why would anyone ever want to use this? Of course, it's only for drugs, right? And it was in the back of my mind for a while. Of course, I didn't buy immediately. Then the next year, I heard about it again, that it crashed. Then in 2015, I had an exchange in Paris. I was a master's student there. And one of the professors who was doing a class on advocacy and innovation asked us to do a presentation about Bitcoin and blockchain, which I thought was curious, to get this legitimation from an academic institution. Sorry if there's sound in the background, it's my cat taking my house apart. Anyway, if there is any legitimation that comes from an academic, I thought, this is much more interesting, because around the time I was also reading about the trial of Ross Ulbricht, and it was also a time of transition for Bitcoin when it was gaining a different sort of reputation on the markets and on the internet. And in 2016, I finally had some money. I wanted to buy Bitcoin, but I read in January this article about this core developer from Bitcoin who said that it's a failed project. His name is Mike Hearn. Basically, he rage quit. And I believed it because it was written in Wall Street Journal and The Economist. I was like, these are legit sources, right? They tell me the truth. But then a year later, the price bounced back to its previous all-time high and kept on going higher. I was like, there's a disconnect between the market and the information which I'm being fed through the media. So that was a moment when I said to myself, let's dive deeper into this and see what it's about, because I was wrong. And I was wrong because of the media and because of my influences. But now it's finally time to explore this. So I wasn't serious into Bitcoin until 2017. And then I decided I want to work in the space. I got some jobs in late 2017, early 2018. They were not paid at all, but I was happy to be part of communities. I was the first person. I wrote the first article for the Litecoin Foundation newsletter, and I did some volunteering for their cause. And then I got a job at Crypto Globe, which is a small news website from England. Then I moved to Crypto Insider the same year, and I basically became editor-in-chief at one point. And it was strange to me because I think it was just because I was the hardest worker around. I don't think I was the best writer. But then in December of 2018, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but the market was brutal. And we were working, but we were not sure if we're going to have jobs the next day, or if anyone's going to pay us at all. And that was when I started considering starting my own project as a safety net, as a backup. And that was the Bitcoin Takeover podcast, which I started recording in December of 2018. And I published the first episode in January of 2019. Initially, the concept was for all episodes to get published on the same day, like a Netflix series. And I did that actually in January. But unfortunately, it turned out not to be a great idea, as people just listen to the interviews with the big names and overlook the other ones. So I guess since season 3, I decided to even the playing field and allow every speaker to get their full attention for a week until I post the next one. And I think I'm on a pretty good streak. I have a good record. Since January of 2019, I've posted more than 160 interviews. I have some of the biggest names, and I'm proud of it. I have very insightful conversation without a format per se. I don't stop them and say, okay, the 90 minutes are over. Let's stop here. Goodbye. I'll see you next time. I actually allow the conversations to flow and go for as long as they can go.
Joe Rogan style.
Yeah, I wouldn't compare myself to Joe Rogan because my podcast tends to get pretty technical, and I like it. I like interviewing developers. I don't like trying to shill. I mean, I did shill my magazine and podcast before this, but I'm not the kind of guy who says Bitcoin is going to $1 million. Keep on buying and whatever. Mm-hmm. I tend to analyze it from more points of view and also understand the more bearish narratives. And of course, I'm not popular with the guys who always say it's going to $1 million and the infinity is going to be divided by 21 million coins and whatever. But I like to keep it real, and not too many people like this.
That is good. Yeah, I was going through. I listened to just a couple episodes. One was the I can't remember the guy's name, but the RGB. And then I saw, like Connor mentioned, you had interviewed Paul Stork about DriveChains. I am curious. I wasn't sure where to throw this question in, but it seems like I mean, like you said, you're not afraid to talk to the controversial figures. It seems like you have a very wide breadth of knowledge, all of the things going on in Bitcoin. So I am a little curious if you can, do you have insights like, obviously you can't predict where Bitcoin will go, but, do you think, do you think DriveChains are going to be successful? Do you think, I don't know if you can speak to any of that. Like where do you see Bitcoin moving?
I think that they need a culture change for Bitcoin. It's not about the technicals, it's more about the community's perception of changing Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand the criticism of it, but I also think that it's one of the proposals that make most sense because it doesn't require dividing the community with a hard fork like the Bitcoin Cash project did. It actually brings to life a lot of interesting projects and brings all the experimentation on Bitcoin layers. But for some reason, there's this whole, oh no, if it's not the Bitcoin base layer or the Lightning Network, then it must be a shitcoin culture. And unfortunately, we need to move past that to be able to truly embrace innovation that comes into Bitcoin. Otherwise, I'm afraid that Ethereum is way too welcoming from this point of view. And even if it's not truly decentralized and it has its own issues, it's gonna embrace and welcome lots of developers who are gonna build interesting stuff. And I don't know where this is going, but honestly, I wish there was more going on in Bitcoin, and DriveChains is just one of the ways through which we can bring more action. But
Yeah,
I don't
for
see it happening under this culture. I think it's gonna be a very niche project. Honestly, it can happen if the miners activate it, because the miners are actually capable of activating soft forks. But if it comes at the expense of losing popularity, I don't think that they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Why do you think the cultural differences between, the Bitcoiners and developers and Ethereum developers of it, like you said, Ethereum is much more welcoming of these things? Why is I have an idea of why Bitcoin is so rigid, but I'd like to hear it from your perspective.
Well, it's rigid for very conservative purposes, and I very much understand them. They don't want to mess up the purest project, which had a fair launch, an immaculate conception, which is a very religious term, and we can get into that if you want, and is possibly the only opportunity that we have to have this type of honest money. Because anyone that you launch today is going to have investors, speculators since day one. But Bitcoin was able to exist in its nascent state for 2 years before having any sort of market valuation. And it's this very cypherpunk project. And if we are able to keep it decentralized and we are able to make it usable for billions around the world, it's unstoppable. So I do want Bitcoin very much to succeed. But we also have to ask ourselves, how are we going to onboard the people who need it? And the answer that most people give nowadays, and it seems to be pretty popular, is that we're going to have federations and mints. And these are built on top of the Lightning Network, and they enable a lot of scalability and a lot of privacy for transactions. But the trade-off is that it's custodial, and you have to set up some sort of multi-sig, and the key holders basically are the bankers. And we go back to recreating a system from which we were trying to get away, because the users don't really hold their keys. They trust that the incentives of the key holders from the mint or the bank or whatever you want to call it are against rugging them. But the ethos of Bitcoin is don't trust, verify. Own your own coins. But only a limited number of people can do that due to scalability limitations. So we have to really consider this and figure out what we want for Bitcoin. Of course, there's a lot of money into reinventing banking, and there are lots of influencers who talk about it positively. But that's not what I got into this, and that's not how I see it.
Yeah, I think. Well, go ahead, Matt. Ask your question, because I was going to change the topic.
Okay. I was going to say, because you mentioned the Immaculate Conception, to kind of bring it into the Christianity of the space, or the religion of the space, maybe we'll call it. Yeah, I've heard that thrown around. I think that was one of was it Robert Breedlove had, I don't know if it was him or he was like quote tweeting someone else who was talking about how Bitcoin is like Jesus. And anyway, it was funny, as a Catholic, for them to say Immaculate Conception. It's like, oh, well, actually that wasn't Jesus. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. Are you, I don't know your perspective on this, is there. It almost seems like the people, I don't know, I'm making a huge generalization here, so anybody whatever, throw on me in the comments. But it seems almost like the people who are so against making any changes, who are the most rigid in Bitcoin, are the ones who are not religious. And it feels like there are some people who, and maybe this isn't, maybe there are people on both sides, but I don't know. I know we talked about Nick Carter a lot, which I guess I don't know. Connor, is he religious or not? I can't remember if we figured that out. But anyway, it seems like there are certain religious people we had super tested on before, who are like, it seems like the people who have their faith somewhere else, grounded somewhere else, are like comfortable with making changes to Bitcoin and see the necessity of that. And then the people who, I don't know, maybe are keeping their faith rooted in Bitcoin are the ones who are like, we can't change this. I don't know. I don't know if I'm making a generalization. I don't know if you've seen similar things, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, I think
kind of difference.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I almost think we've probably had more like Bitcoin maxis on this podcast than we have, ETH maxis or whatever, Web3 people. But with all of them that we've brought on, because we've only brought on Christians so far, but they're not, they're not that type of Bitcoin maxi, for lack of a better word. But it's I think that is like a curious kind of way of looking at it, because there is something of like this Bitcoin religion here. I'll let Vlad respond to your question there, but before we dive too hard into the Bitcoin stuff, I think maybe we can kind of set the stage with some of this Christianity in Eastern Europe topics. I think that'll feed into it. But I'll let Vlad respond with his thoughts.
Unfortunately, every form of money that we have ever known has become a religion by the time it became dominant, because people need to believe that what they're holding and what they're using in their daily trades has value. And if you look at the US dollar, it became a religion through music and films and all of this culture that was built around the US dollar being superior. You look at 1930s films, even the old ones have, like, even the Westerns, there's one that's called A Fistful of Dollars. You can think of old films like Casablanca or whatever, where the dollar was dominant and was presented as being superior. There's a lot of culture around the dollar, and it can get very religious. I think the peak of it was with all of that hip-hop movement, where it was all about throwing stacks of cash and bragging about it, and even the Lambo culture or whatever. It's all about idolizing this currency. And
cash rules everything around me.
Exactly, Wu-Tang.
Yep, Wu-Tang. Yep.
It's all about the Benjamins, yeah. So.
Wu-Tang is for the children. Anyway, what I wanted to say.
Not my children, if you're watching, though. Just to clarify.
You're not gonna let them listen to Wu-Tang? Oh man.
Not for a while, Connor. Not for a while.
There's that guy. What's his name? Oh no. So he made a few music videos. One of them is Bitcoin Rules Everything Around Me, Bream. And there's another one that's called Holding for the Longest Time, which is a cover of Billy Joel's For the Longest Time.
Oh no. I worry that our biggest fan is gonna look for that and replicate it, but I'll worry about chat another day. That's good stuff though.
What was his name? It's really some of the best Bitcoin music you'll ever find. Holding for the longest time. Let me type this. It's important.
Okay.
It is.
We'll allow
it
this
is.
one.
You'll have
Zaotong.
Who's that?
Zaotong. That's his name. ZHOUTONGUED.
Shout out Zaotong.
Yeah, he's an OG. He wrote some songs about buying at $3 or whatever, and was doing shout outs back in 2013 to the influencers of the time, like Tatiana Moroz, if you met her.
Well,
and
I'd be writing hymns about Bitcoin too if I bought it in that early also, so I guess.
Yeah, but he did that until 2016 or something, and then he quit.
Oh shoot, he quit.
This is good.
Man.
He took his
But
money
it's
and
some of
ran.
the earliest Bitcoin music.
Wow,
Wow.
that's great. That is great.
Yeah, but on the point of religion, yes, money to some extent for the masses to believe in it has to gain this cultish whatever. And some of the Bitcoin influencers figured this out and they wanted to establish a culture for this. Except that so far it hasn't been too original. I think it borrowed elements from the narratives of gold, and it also borrowed elements from the fiat culture in order to build something which is a strange hybrid. There is nothing original, as far as I know, about the narratives of Bitcoin. You can apply some of the same stuff to stocks or to gold. You can talk about sound money. You can talk about generational wealth. You can talk about holding and not selling, whatever.
Interesting.
But yeah, unfortunately, it leads to this sort of narratives and it removes the rationality that precedes the invention of Bitcoin for the purpose of creating mass adoption. And to some extent, I respect it, but on the other hand, I realize it's not really for me. I can't worship money, you know? Money is just a means to an end.
It is a great point, like you're saying. I mean, then this culture of saying we're removing our rationality for Bitcoin in the first place, then this leads to, like you're saying, the fediments, the federations, and all that stuff. So interesting. Kind of what were you going to say?
No, yeah, that's all very true. I was just going to say that on this podcast, we kind of hate Bitcoin influences. So I think that's one of the reasons.
That's fine. I'm an influencer's influencer.
Yeah, you're the influencer's influencer.
Yeah.
We are the influencer's
Anti-influencer.
the influencer's nightmare. Anyway, not yet, but maybe we will be soon.
If we get enough influence one of these days.
Well, I don't want to call out any names particularly here, but anyway.
I just mean.
Anyway, what I was going to say is one of the reasons I think I wanted to get you on was just because I saw that you like to talk to people who are actually building things, devs. We like to talk to builders. We hosted Super Testnet recently, which I think was one of our best episodes, even if it's wasn't a popular episode because he's not a big name yet.
Yeah, no, great episode. Yep,
he's great
for sure. But and so I appreciate some of the perspective you have on the Bitcoin space. I was acquainted with you first. I think it was some conference you went to. It was a Bitcoin conference, but there was a Ethereum conference being held, I guess, next door. So I think you gave your magazine to Vitalik at the time. And so I know some of the ETH people I follow will in your comments mad about certain things you were saying, but I can tell that you post with a lot of irony. And so I was just in the comments as well saying, hey, I don't think you need to take them too fully serious. But you are a Bitcoin maxi, for whatever that term might mean in some sense of the word, right?
I did a presentation about that last week in Prague, and I distinguished between the Bitcoin maximalists who are maximalists at the protocol level. So they say you should be using the Bitcoin network and its layers. And there's also the monetary maximalists who say that only BTC, the token, is legit and everything else is a shitcoin. And I think that the biggest distinction is that on the Bitcoin base layer, you can issue a lot of stuff that's not the BTC token. You can use operational codes or opcodes like op return to create tokens on counterparty, for example. Tether USDT was created on Bitcoin on the Omni layer, and that was back in 2015. And we tend to forget this, that there was a lot of innovation and experimentation in Bitcoin. And I'm more on the side of creating stuff and building it on top of the hardest money that we have in the digital era. There are also the ones who say, no, you should just, everything else is a scam if it's not BTC, and therefore you should not even look into it. But it seems like there is a huge market, at least for stable coins right now. They're being used in third world countries that have no access to US dollars. And the fact that we ignore it might be, dangerous. I know that there are guys who are trying to build this on Lightning. I know that this was built to some extent on the Liquid side chain for as long as that one was being used. Now it's a ghost town. But I just wish more of this was done on Bitcoin. And that's what my definition of Bitcoin maximalism is, to maximize what you can do with Bitcoin. There are guys who say, no, maximalism means conservatism. And it means that you should not change anything. You should advocate for everything to stay the exact same. And everything else is degeneracy or whatever. But I disagree. I think that's our point of contention.
No, I think it's a useful distinction. And one thing I think probably my biggest problem with some of this influencer culture is just, I think there's something pernicious to the fact that you're not really building anything, or, promoting, you're creating a product, or you're creating, something that has like real value. You're just you're a talking head. And, I respect people who are at least trying things and doing things that, take risk, more than I respect somebody who's able to sort of grift off of a narrative that already has a lot of public support. So I do appreciate that perspective as well. So to kind of switch gears a little bit, it's not really switching gears, but we wanted to talk about Christianity in Eastern Europe. And I think the main reason we want to talk about this for a Bitcoin audience is, I do think, and maybe you can speak to this, Vlad, I think there is something of a non or an anti-Christian culture in Bitcoin. Not totally, but just because it seems to have started very much as a libertarian project and an anti-authoritarian project. And at least here in the West, some people associate authoritarianism, with Christianity broadly, or more specifically with the Catholic Church. I would say for sure.
Well, in America,
in the West,
the evangelical runs everything. Anyway, it's a Protestant country.
In the West, in the West, the church and the government are a bit too. They're a little bit too linked at times, it feels, and
hold on, you can't say
in
terms of the way they're regarded by people, we're a little more.
Yeah. I think historically, we're getting to a point where people then, like you're saying, they're turning against the church, because of its authority,
right?
Or its,
but in Eastern Europe, usually people would say the church is much more linked with some of the political regimes there, like you see in Russia or whatnot. I don't know how it is in Romania, but
I say that here in the West, though, Connor, it's like people are subservient to government because they're taught they need to respect it. Especially here in America, like we're too formal, and we don't call out when something's wrong. Like all the crap that's going on right now, nobody calls out the stupid until starts, affecting them in their backyard, essentially.
I don't know. I think America's different. I feel like I've heard people in other countries say that Americans, have this freedom of speech. They're not afraid to speak against their own government. We're like,
freedom of speech, but how many people are doing action?
Anyway, so the real topic, though, is
to get away from America, bring us east.
Okay, has more to do with Bitcoin in the sense that if people are looking at the church as kind of an authoritarian figure, Bitcoin represents kind of the opposite to that. Like, I'll say this. I'll say, like, I look up Bitcoin influencers, and maybe I'm kind of neurotic, but I like to search people on Twitter and see what kind of opinions they have on things that I care about, like Christianity. And even some of the Bitcoin influencers who I don't even know, like most of them, I think most Bitcoin influencers I encounter are not Christian. But the ones that they seem to, at the very least, like this idea of separation of church and state, specifically how it relates that, Bitcoin maybe is a separation of money and state to them, right? So it's kind of the carrying on of this, these liberal values, this liberalism in a sense. And, just because of those reasons alone, it maybe attracts a lot of people who don't like authority, and also for that reason don't like the church. Is that true? I don't know, but there definitely are Christian Bitcoiners, but that is a thought here in the West. And so I'm kind of curious what the thought is there in Eastern Europe, because I have a tweet here from you, Vlad, that you posted in last year. And you said it's easy to hate on Christians, but when you take a look at the most prominent anti-communist activists from Eastern and Central Europe, you're going to realize that many of them were good Christians whose faith made them survive years of prison. And then you mentioned Václav Benda and this other figure I don't know, Cornelio
Koposu, probably.
Okay. And you say maybe that they did it for the sake of going 100% against the atheist system. Maybe they cared about preserving the values and traditions they inherited from their families. Regardless of the motivation, Christianity provided a way to resist totalitarian regimes, which is definitely not an opinion that I would say many people in the West carry. So I'm kind of curious, maybe you can expound on that a little bit more for us, and then we can go on to maybe the Bitcoin relations. But let's just talk about, Christianity in Eastern Europe. Like, what's the difference from how Westerners view it?
Let me explain to you two practical examples from real life. One of them is Corneliu Coposu, who was one of the biggest political figures of the 1990s in Romania. Unfortunately, he died before he was able to actually become president because... No, he didn't run for president. He ran for office for the parliament, but he didn't become part of the dominant party, which... Actually, the resistance, the opposition won in 1996, 7 years after the revolution, but by that time he had passed. But he was a prominent political figure in the 1940s in Romania. He was a member of the Christian Democrat Peasants' Party, which was a big deal. At the time, it was the second largest party after the liberal one, and liberal in Europe means right-wing, pro-freedom. And basically, he went to prison, and he was there for most of his life, and he was tortured. In Christian Orthodox religion, you make the sign of the cross when you enter a church or when you're praying, and it's always north, south, east, west. In Catholic or Protestant church, it's north, south, west, east. But I'm presenting this for the simple reason that if they were doing this in prison, and they were caught, they would endure unimaginable torture, and they had to do it with their tongues inside of their mouths as a way of praying in their thought, and that was it. That's what political prisoners were doing, especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Romania. I think in the 80s it became more relaxed and then the regime collapsed, but it was horrible. If you want to learn more about it, search for Experimentul Pitești, or the Pitești experiment. Pitești is Pitesti. And you're going to find some horrid stories about people being tortured and being made to eat their own shit and being basically... I don't want to describe what kind of torture they had to endure for the simple reason that they were Christians. But after the revolution, my mother's generation, and right now my mother, is going to church for the simple reason that they were not allowed to go during the communist era. Communism meant creating the new man. And part of the problem in that way of creating the new utopian society was religion, which was deemed to be the opium of the people. That's a quote by Karl Marx. So they did their best to abolish all the religious rituals and make people not think about God, or replace God with the party, with the communist ideas. They did not succeed entirely, but there were still persecution, not prosecutions. And the priests who survived were also some of the first ones to embrace the new liberal once again means pro-freedom in Europe, new liberal society that was built after 1989. So it's certainly interesting that in Eastern Europe, you have the example of Benda, and you have many such figures across every former communist country. They resisted communism through their Christian faith, which they have had since their younger days before communist regime, and they kept it, and then they used it as a way to rebuild themselves and rise from their own ashes. And it's a very powerful tool, and it goes back to the days of early Christianity when the Christians were being prosecuted and the religion was basically a way for them to cope with all of that persecution. And on the topic of religion and church, I actually wanted to take this to the early Christian days when there was no church, and the early Christians were against the idea of establishing any kind of church, and they wanted their belief system to be decentralized and spread around the world without any centralizing institutions. And the reason why there was the schism in 1054 also concerned some of these practices of institutionalization. It had nothing to do with the perception of Jesus himself, or the perception of what God is. It had everything to do with human politics, about how they wanted to organize the churches. And I think to some extent it was necessary for Christianity to become institutionalized, because it became more accessible for people, and it gave them a way to visualize and experience the faith within an institution. But it very much wasn't part of the original plan of what the Christians wanted.
Well, you saying like the Eastern Church is somewhat more decentralized in a sense than maybe the Western Catholic Church. At least that they don't recognize a singular patriarch, right? They have multiple patriarchs. Like, how does that even work? In Romania, you have a Romanian patriarch, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's distinct from the Russian patriarch. That's distinct from the ecumenical patriarch in Constantinople, Greece, or wherever, right? Like these are all
but
separate
it wasn't always like this. It was, in the beginning, all of the eastern side of the Christian church was not controlled, politically subordinated to the Constantinople church. And I think that the fall of Constantinople led to a situation where all of the churches had to figure out stuff for themselves. For a while, it was Russia that was the dominant Christian Orthodox country. But for political reasons, every country wanted to have its own patriarchy and its own central church, to call it like that, like a central bank. The parallels can be made indefinitely. But it's certainly interesting how in the early 19th century and late 19th century, every ruler in Romania wanted to reorganize the church and do something with it. I think churches also in Romania were the first schools. So kids were going to church to study, because it was the place to find the one book that was being printed. And it was also the place to find the most educated person in the village, which was the priest. So the church served also this educational purpose for at least a century before they started building proper schools and they separated the institutions. But still, in school, when I was in school, I used to have a religion class 1 hour a week. And it was about, mostly 95%, it was about learning about the Christian Orthodox Church. And 5% of it was also to understand that there are also other churches out there, and we should not be, intolerant to them. But it was certainly interesting that we were praying in class, and we also had a French teacher in middle school who taught us basically how to say Our Father in French. And before every class, we would say Our Father in French, and I had to learn that. Notre Père qui est ciel, que ton nom sanctifié, que ton règne arrive, que ta volonté soit faite. I forgot how it goes. But
in the Western Church, we learn it in Latin for those of us that go into that. Pater noster qui es in Chile. Yep. Or
Fiat voluntas tua.
Spanish, Padre Nuestro. Yep.
That's good. So I am curious. I definitely, again, we're Western, Brandon and I are Catholic. I feel like I've, understood, I've tried to study church history, after 1054, I only know the Catholic history, right? I don't know enough about the East after that point. So you're saying, I'm curious, and I don't know if you have all the perspective here as well, right? But are you saying each country wanted their own patriarch? Like they're like, hey, make a patriarch for my country so that I can do my own thing? Or I guess I was under the impression that it was almost like, hey, we're handing it off. Like, I'm not going to be in charge of all of you. Like, you can be in charge of yourself. And maybe that's the same thing, but maybe there's a difference.
No, it's not. It's a very important distinction to make.
Okay.
My country was under the dominance of lots of empires. Well, not lots of them, but at least 3 of them left their mark. And we didn't want to be politically subjected to, at the time, it was the Kingdom of Russia. They had a Tsar, and it was an entirely different situation. But part of the independence of Romania was also to have its own patriarchy and its own church and its own coin and stuff like that.
Okay.
It was a requirement. And there was no greater authority or tradition to appeal, as was the case with the Catholic Church. So we have had our own patriarchy for, I think, at least 150 years. I got to look it up. I don't want to say something stupid.
I think I've heard some people talk recently about like, especially with all this stuff going on in Ukraine and Russia, that like the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and patriarch was like really trying to separate themselves from the Russian church for obvious reasons. It's almost like I don't know, people talk about the Balkans and how it's like, oh, there's gonna, I mean, for all we know, they'll split up into like 20 more countries, right? And it's almost like I don't know, is there like, are you so against the countries next to you? Like, no, I got to have my own church. I don't know.
You have to also understand what Balkanization is about and why the Balkans split.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm tired. Sorry, I was about to say Roman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, who are Muslim, were big conquerors in the Middle Ages. They conquered lots of countries and territories, and some of them allowed themselves to become conquered also religiously. And that was a big deal for the Ottoman Empire. It was their way of expanding. If the country did not want to convert to Islam, as was the case of Romanian territories, they would only ask us to pay high taxes and deliver to them young boys to become soldiers and young girls to become mothers. So this was part of the payment that, it was a tax for not being attacked. But they could never turn us into a Muslim country, which is why we are homogeneous. We're more than 90% Christian Orthodox, and we are able to function much better as one nation. In the case of former Yugoslavian countries, and that's from where the term Balkanization comes from, there's at least 2 of them. There's Bosnia, which is mostly Muslim. And don't quote me on this. I think also there are Muslims in Herzegovina. I don't want to say something stupid. But anyway, their reason of contention was the fact that there are lots of Muslims in there. And there are also Muslims in Bulgaria and Greece, and they demand to be separate and to be subjected to another church. It's certainly interesting. In Romania, we haven't had a single mosque until the year 1920, I think. And that was only because we were given new territories, and the population within those territories was partly Muslim. They used to be part of. We won World War I. We were on the part of Entente, which meant that we received new territories after the war, and we kept them. We still have them today. And the king at the time, the king of Romania, decided to build a mosque in Constanța, which is by the seaside, by the Black Sea. And he was like, yeah, we need to keep these people peaceful. We don't hate them. We need to present to them this idea that they're also Romanian. And we're going to build a mosque for it. But before 1920, there was not a single mosque in Romania.
Interesting.
We were so Christian that there's this ruler from the 1600s who decided, basically, he was taken hostage, he and his 3 sons. And he was blackmailed. He said, okay, unless you convert your country to Islam, we're going to murder your children in front of you and then kill you. And he was like, okay. And that actually happened. All of his 3 kids died in front of him, and then he was executed too. So they were not able to get what they wanted. They changed the ruler. They tried to put someone who might make the change for them. Didn't happen. We're such stubborn people that we speak a Latin language after 2,000 years since the Roman Empire has left our lands, and after centuries when we were surrounded by Slavic countries, but we don't speak a Slavic language. It's fascinating, really, how we were able to resist and remain both Latin and also Christian.
Yeah, I think,
but to be Latin and Christian and not Catholic, not Roman. And anyway,
we do have some Catholics, but
Okay.
like 2%.
Yeah.
They're very small.
it's
and
interesting.
imagine not a lot of Protestants over there, but maybe a small contingent, huh?
We do have some of them, like Jehovah's Witness or
Oh, no,
Seventh-day.
we don't count those. Those don't count.
We don't count them either because they're very insignificant in numbers, not as humans.
Nah. Anyway, all right, cool. Well,
Honestly,
no,
they wouldn't want to count themselves anyway. So it's,
Sure. Well, they can only count their 144,000, I think, is
that's the
okay. I don't know if that joke landed. Anyway, so no, I think this is good. So why I think this was a good discussion, particularly as it relates to Bitcoin, is because I don't think a lot of Bitcoiners, at least here in the West, are maybe familiar with that perspective, and it's it's a different one. I'm kind of curious, like, what is your takeaway from like Bitcoin culture? Like, why did you put out that tweet? It seems like you were maybe sharing something that you felt that people you were interacting with maybe did not share that perspective. Do you think Bitcoin leans anti-Christian or non-Christian? Do you think the culture leans that way, or is it some other reason that you made that tweet?
Well, I do see a lot of people on both sides. You have guys like Jimmy Song who say that Bitcoin brought them to Jesus.
Mhm.
And then you have, I'm not going to give any examples, but I very much relate to this side. It's money. It should not be treated religiously. It's just a way for us to conduct trades, and religion is our personal business. It has nothing to do with our trades, even though some people take everything and understand everything through their religion. But I put out that tweet because I think that the perspective on the issue is super American centric, and most of the people who comment on the issue are American. No offense here. It's just that you are in a larger number and you have louder voices. And I wanted to be understood that there are parts of the world that are Christian and that actually use Christianity as a way to resist. And I have a lot of respect for this. I also go to church, not as often as I should, but I go for all the proceedings. And for example, my uncle died last year, and there's this tradition to go every 3 months to the church and give away food to the poor and participate in this ceremony where we also visit the grave and we remember him, and then we gather at a family lunch and talk about the memory of our uncle or our deceased one. It doesn't matter who it was. So we do this in the first year every 3 months, and then we go every year. And we also have baptisms. We also have all of these weddings and everything else, which is tied also to the Christian religion. And I participate in that. I don't mind it. I think it's pretty nice, and I understand the purpose of it. It's just that I also have the side of me that rejects determinism. And I believe that I am the creator of my own fate. And I might be a heretic here, but I try to push myself and push my limits and not try to think that there's anything destined or given to me, and try to overcome all the time, put myself in much better position than before. It motivates me, because otherwise I think I would become more complacent if I believed that there's any determinism and my fate was sealed from the moment when I was born and there's nothing I can do to change it. I think, for example, I'm not sure if you read from Leibniz. He wrote this induction theory in which basically he described a philosophical idea where every thought that you have is basically being processed by God, and it goes to God and it gets either accepted or rejected. It's an interesting philosophical idea, but I believe in free will.
Interesting. I haven't read that. I have read like one thing from Leibniz, but no, it was not that.
Monads, probably.
Yes. So you're familiar with Leibniz as well, then?
I'm a PhD in philosophy dropout.
Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, no, that's great. Yeah, and so another PhD in philosophy had recommended it to me because we were talking about stuff, and I really liked the monadology. I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I'm a physics guy myself, and so I was like, oh, I like the way he's making these these non-material particles interactive with each other. But anyway, that's how I read it. But anyway, I have not read his other works.
Vlad, yeah, I want your take on Andrew Tate, considering you're in Romania. I have to ask because I'm like that, because like I know he's kind of into the crypto space. I want to know what the perception is of him and his brother Tristan. Like, they've become internet just sensations the past year and a half or so. So just want to know what your thoughts are on that, and because they kind of represent a disposition that I don't know if it's like a Bitcoin disposition, but it's definitely a libertarian disposition. So I'm just curious.
I'm not sure how much of Andrew Tate you watched and what you've seen of his stuff. It's super diverse. You can spend hours diving into his philosophy. I think he definitely is one of the most interesting figures of our time. And he's worth watching regardless if you like him or not, because he has a very interesting strategy. And I can explain to him what he does, basically, if you want and you're interested. But first of all, let me tell you my opinion of him. He's a pimp. And of course, he needs attention. And of course, he needs sympathy from others. But basically, I'm not sure if people in Romania like him too much. It's kind of funny that he promoted Romania much better than any Ministry of Tourism or whatever it is that we have here. More people speak about Romania because of him than anyone else here in Romania. It's insane. I can give him credit for that. And I kind of respect the fact that he promoted my country. And he said some nice stuff about it. He said that it's peaceful, the girls are nice, the food is good. I agree with that. So, yeah, thank you for boosting our tourism. At the same time, he came to Romania for the simple reason that we have nice girls who are also Christian, and they don't want to engage in prostitution too much. We don't have too many porn stars, we don't have many prostitutes, but we have a lot of cam girls, because morally, the fact that you're not being touched by a man and you're not selling your body, but you're basically selling your mind, is more morally acceptable than selling your body directly. And we have all of these cam girls who figure out that their dead-end job doesn't get them anywhere, but they probably have 15, 20 years of very great beauty that they can sell. And they strip on a webcam. And people pay for that for some reason. And Andrew Tate found this market in Eastern Europe, and he started exploiting it. He made a lot of money, but not directly from the camming, but from the stuff that happens afterwards. As in, you subscribe to that girl's OnlyFans, and you think that you're talking to her. You're actually talking to a dude who's lying to you and pretending that he cares. I think most of this stuff has to do more with psychology, and these people need attention, and they think they get attention from a very beautiful woman, which they're not, but they believe it, and it makes them feel better about themselves, and it keeps them productive. I'm not judging, but this is what usually happens. And Andrew Tate figured out, okay, there are people who want to step out of this, what he calls matrix, and become alpha males and take their lives into their own hands and do something with whatever it is that they have, become hustlers or whatever. And she was like, why don't I create content that also says that porn is evil and you should strive to have a beautiful wife and a nice house and a nice car and start a family? And he started saying the exact opposite of what made him a millionaire, what earned his living. Because basically he's winning on both sides. On one side, he's selling OnlyFans cam girls. On the other side, he's selling courses on how to become a better man. And it's for people who step out of that cycle. So I gotta hand it to him for figuring this out, that he's gonna make money both ways. Regardless of what you think, you're gonna end up finding out about his videos. And he started a new wave, I think, in YouTube content, because I also see female content creators. There's a lady called Pearl who is very traditionalistic, to the extent that even my grandma would tell her, you're kind of crazy there. Like she openly says that a woman should never divorce, regardless of the reason. Even if she's beat up, it's for a good purpose. I mean, I find it hard to agree with that.
Yeah, I think when I don't know if you know who Matt Walsh is. He's a whatever.
I know he did that documentary, What Is a Woman?
He did,
I enjoyed it.
And so when Pearl was arguing with Matt Walsh on Twitter, and trying to like tell him like how to be married, and he's like, whatever, been married for years and has kids. I was like, okay, I don't think she knows what she's talking about. Anyway, not the.
Matt and I met Pearl. Well,
we
not
did.
really.
We met her. Yeah,
she was at Thank God for Bitcoin, because I guess her cousin was helping with the production. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, my point is that Andrew Tate gave birth to this entire new wave of content creators who are very traditionalistic and based, and I think they're much closer to the religion. Honestly, Andrew Tate pretends to be Muslim, but I think it's more for convenience and to be, for his case, he has been accused of human trafficking here in Romania, and he has been under investigation. I think it helps his cause to present himself as being religious in some way, and he finds more convenience in Islam for whatever reason. He pretends it's a religion of peace and blah blah.
I think that's probably.
I think it helps his cause, and for the sake of legal defense, this can be helpful, especially in a country that probably doesn't really understand Islam. But yeah, I don't believe in what he says. I believe in what he does, and he's a pimp. I condemn his actions. I can't agree with him. But I can agree that to some extent, maybe teenagers are listening to his videos, and maybe that 90% of it is something with which any reasonable person can agree, and 10% of it is batshit crazy. Maybe that the 90% can actually help someone improve his life, and it's hard for me to argue against that.
Nope, I'm in lockstep with you on that take. Yeah, in terms of like, there's some things that he says that definitely like prick your conscience, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's something to take there. But when you look at his overall actions and work, it's like, yeah, probably not for me on a full-time basis. But yeah, there are nuggets of truth to what he has to say and what he presents for somebody who might not necessarily know how to find direction or focus in life from that respect.
Just so we're not all in lockstep, I think the his bad things are enough to like I wish people would not watch him. I think there are other places to get nuggets of truth.
I agree with you, Matt, but you know what I mean.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yeah. No, I understand. I'm not saying that you're encouraging people.
I'm not telling people to go join his army here.
I do think. I don't know. There just is a I don't know, like an identity crisis in men from the age of 13 to 40, and it maybe not 40, maybe 30, but anyway, maybe 40. And I do think, and it's interesting, and I've seen this in other people I know, who are younger and they're like, they talk about Tate and I'm like, no, like watch someone else, where like, I'm like, oh no, Jordan Peterson. Like, I think he, even though he, is not completely on the mark all the time, but I think he's, and anyway, it's there's definitely a market to tap into, which like you're saying, Vlad, I think Andrew Tate has definitely tapped into the market. I just hope that we get more people tapping into the market in a different way.
It's like
also,
like
I do believe that Andrew Tate is much better than some social justice warrior who gets a huge platform complaining.
Yeah.
And
but that's it. There's
Marxist, whatever.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I think there's the market for people to present some form of manliness and it's anyway, and you're right. A lot of
it's kind of ironic, right? That a metrosexual who looks like Pitbull, the singer, ended up becoming the symbol of masculinity online.
He's got the credibility from like, didn't he do UFC or something? Like, anyway,
he was a kickboxing
champion.
Kickboxing, yeah.
Matt might be the oldest one on the co-host panel, so he doesn't understand the culture as much as Brandon and I do. But.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we figured this out.
I thought Brandon was Connor.
I thought Brandon was older than me, but we added this up the other day, and I'm like 2 months older, I think, than everyone else.
I'm the only technical Zoomer on the podcast, so
yes, that is true. Yeah, Matt and I are scraping the barrel of the millennial.
Yeah, I'm practically a boomer. All right.
I mean, if you saw the music I listen to, you might think I'm a boomer. So,
that's funny.
But anyway, I think to tie it back into the Bitcoin conversation, I think what Vlad says about Andrew Tate, he provides a framework for people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have certain values to at least develop somewhat of these values of productivity or bettering your life or whatnot. And I tend to think Bitcoin kind of offers the same thing. So I want to talk about, I guess, go back to this concept of like the Bitcoin religion. And so you said you might be somewhat of a heretic, Vlad, which I don't fully understand why the concept of, I guess, determinism might have caused you to think outside the church. So maybe there's some bit of orthodox philosophy, which I don't understand there. But more importantly, I put out a tweet yesterday, which didn't get any. I thought it was a great tweet, but didn't get any response. But what I said is...
that's what happens to great ones.
Always.
But when you write very bad ones, they get a lot of traction for some reason.
Well, I said Christians are unorthodox Bitcoin thinkers, and that we might update that label to heretic in a few years. Because I tend to think that, within the realm of Bitcoin orthodoxy, there's only so much tolerance for outside opinions to what you might call the Bitcoin religion or this Bitcoin maximalism, immaculate consumption, kind of that whole theory that makes what Bitcoin, kind of has become today, at least on the Twitter sphere. And there's so much room for people who maybe think a little more pragmatically about Bitcoin, which I think almost all Christians kind of are forced to, because if you already accept, some higher good or ultimate source of truth, Bitcoin at best can be a tool to help you, achieve something. So I would say we here on the podcast like Bitcoin because it's decentralized money. It provides us, ways to transact with each other without having to answer to some, authority that might be anti our beliefs, which we see here a lot in the West and, probably worldwide. There's definitely censorship happening, across the board. And a lot of it is directed towards, people who might be more conservative, which Christians by and large fall in that camp. So we look at Bitcoin pragmatically, and it seems increasingly there's a culture of Bitcoin orthodoxy that requires you to subscribe to all these sets of beliefs that Christians might not feel welcome in. And so what I kind of hope to do with the podcast is I think it would be good if we could carve out a Christian space here, not just because I think, Bitcoin should be entirely Christian. Really, I think everybody with all this diverse beliefs that we have across the world should have a seat at the table. And Christians are one group, Muslims are another group. whatever belief you might subscribe to, atheist or a group. You could subscribe maybe by race or country. Anyway, we have all these diverse opinions on what the world ought to be, and Bitcoin should be for everybody. And that means that there should be tolerance for a wide diversity of beliefs. And to kind of tie this slightly together before I hand it off to you, what I like about Vaclav Benda is he had this concept, or he was participating in this concept in the Czech Republic under communism. They called it, I guess, Charter 77. And the idea is that there was many different people within the Czech Republic who were labeled dissidents or outsiders by the communist regime there. And Charter 77 allowed them to all come together with the common interest of protecting, the things that they cared about under communism, and seeking political relief for all of these disparate groups. And I would like to think that Bitcoin could be something of that as well. But I don't know that the Bitcoin influencer culture right now is lending towards that. Instead, they seem to be thinking of Bitcoin as a monolithic set of beliefs that you must subscribe to, otherwise you're not a Bitcoiner. And so that's my fear. As a Christian, I'm mainly interested about Christian interests, but that's not to say I'm opposed to other interests. I would just like to see a little bit of a more open discourse here. So it's not necessarily a question, but I guess maybe the question is, since you've already acknowledged that there's this belief system maybe in Bitcoin, what do you think we can do about it? Do you think it's going to continue? Or do you think maybe Bitcoin is going to break free from that kind of hegemony in some sense? What do you think?
I believe that every nation, every religion, every human group, every tribe needs some sort of external threat and a common enemy in order to be able to get together and fight for a common purpose. In the case of Bitcoin, I think it wasn't attacked enough for the community at large to come together and say, yeah, we set aside our differences. We might see the future of the project differently, but at the same time, we have a very common interest on the short to midterm, and let's get together, unite our forces, and go to war against this threat. I don't think we've had enough of that. Maybe because governments, especially in the West, have been friendly to the idea of Bitcoin. It wasn't banned enough times. I don't think it's understood well enough around the world by legislators. So far, we didn't have proper wars when it comes to Bitcoin. I think what it takes for any political or ideological or religious movement to actually unite and become homogeneous is some sort of external threat. So far, it's just influencers trying to make money, selling books, selling steak dinners. I'm not sure if you caught that phase of influencing in Bitcoin, or you get to pay a ticket to a steak dinner and you get to sit next to your favorite book author and you get your book signed. I don't like this. I don't. So I didn't get into Bitcoin to worship anyone from Satoshi to any influencer. I think it's technology, and that's the way that I look at it. It's useful for us humans, but it should not substitute God or religion or something which concerns the human spirit. I'm going to stop here because I don't want anyone listening to feel offended by my statement. But basically, my point is that Bitcoin needs serious threats in order for the community to converge and unite for a common purpose. And also, I disagree with the whole Satoshi cult and worshipping. So I think it's pretty stupid. Obviously, the guy did not want to be known and did not want to be worshipped, but it seems like people build temples. Should we call them temples? They sell merchandise. They build shrines, like
make
pubs
AI
and whatever,
images
that are centered around the identity of Satoshi. Satoshi's place, Satoshi's bar, Satoshi's wallet, all of this stuff.
This is the question I was trying to ask at the beginning when I was like, oh, do you think DriveChains will succeed? And then I said a few other things. So you did say, right, in order for us to get some homogeneity, I don't know if I want to use that word, in the Bitcoin space, it's going to take
Hegemony.
some external threat. What do you have any foresight? Like, what do you think is going to be the next thing that happens in the Bitcoin space? Is it going to be an external threat that gets us to be homogenous? Is it going to be is there going to be a hard fork that's going to separate people ideologically again? Do you have any sense what's the next thing that's going to happen? Is it going to be DriveChains? Is it going to be some other layer 2? Is it going to be the US adopting it as a currency? What's if you had a
Honestly, there are two major threats to the Bitcoin project. The first one is competition from altcoins that might scale better and might onboard more users and become more useful to the average person who doesn't care about immaculate conception, sound money, or any of these narratives. They just want to use some sort of payment technology without going to banks and without going to the state. And sometimes I fear that Ethereum has done a pretty good job at creating layer 2s. This bear market, we're going to see if they're any useful. But so far, I think they have pretty large volume. And a lot of Tether is being traded, and USD issued by Circle, is being traded on these layers with very small fees. And it's actually useful for people around the world. But the culture in Bitcoin does not allow for this to get built. And even if it gets built, it doesn't get much traction. So I believe that Bitcoin is going to require a change in culture to understand that it doesn't matter how you use your coins. It's your own money. You should not have this sort of council of elders who tell you, this is not the right way to use it. You should only buy and sell from these places. Ideally, you should never sell. You should only buy. You should only use these wallets. I think there is an entire lifestyle that has been built around this idea of maximalism, but I disagree with their understanding of maximalism. I think it should be about maximizing what Bitcoin does. But there's also the threat of what they call the security budget, right? Because if you read the white paper, Satoshi's biggest bet is that the transaction fees are going to be able to subsidize the diminishing block reward. After every 210,000 blocks, which roughly adds up to 4 years, you're going to have this reduction of mining rewards that gets split. And so far, it's been good. And I think before every halving, there was this type of concern that the miners might get dropped. The consequence why this did not happen is that the price always doubled. Mining also became much more efficient. It went from just guys mining on their laptops to optimizing graphical processing units, GPUs, to mine, and all the way to creating dedicated devices, ASICs, which have only one function, and that is to run SHA-256 cycles. And even these technologies got more advanced and they became smaller and started consuming less energy per hash produced. And I think it's only getting better and more efficient. But you can't predict human action. You can't predict demand. You can try to create it, but at the same time, you can see that even something as basic as bread has fluctuations in terms of supply and demand. You can see that there are times when it's more of a popular food and other times when it's not being bought as much. And you have to adjust that somehow. In the case of Bitcoin, some people assume that it's going to go up according to some schedule or some predetermined plan for some reason. And if enough people believe it, they're going to act accordingly. But so far, it did not work. I mean, we did get the price increase, but you also have to ask yourself, how much money does it take from this point on to do another 2x after every 4 years? Because we're going to flip gold, we're going to flip bonds, we're going to flip Apple. And then what? How much money is there in the world? Is there going to be printed to infinity to allow Bitcoin to go to $10 million? And if Bitcoin goes to $10 million, how much is a hamburger going to be? 1,000? I don't know. But it's still I think it's not a realistic thesis, and I think Bitcoin needs to scale somehow to be able to get more transactions. I think that's my belief right now. Everything else is more relativistic and tries to assume that people are going to act in a certain way when they are confronted with the situation.
So this is good. I did, I was trying to get, what's the next thing that's going to happen. And so you do think we're going to have to run up against some existential threat that's going to force us to say, we're going to, add DriveChains to increase miner revenue. We're going to have to, do something else in order to keep this thing alive.
That might be the case, but in maybe 15 years, when it actually becomes a threat. And it's good that proposals come up right now, and we have enough time to act. Because if you act in a situation of emergency, you're very likely to make poor decisions and create a situation where you break the project instead of fixing it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we lost Brandon, and I know it's almost it's like 2. It's got to be 2 a.m. over there, Vlad, right? But
but I very much enjoyed this. Don't worry.
No, yeah, great. We super glad that we were able to get you on. We've been trying to do that for a little bit of time now. So happy that you accepted our invite and took us up on the offer. And it really is enlightening for us coming from America with the loud mouths and whatnot to get a different perspective over here. So we'll
need some of that Eastern mysticism. Yeah.
But maybe we can get you on the podcast again sometime, because I feel like we didn't really fully flesh everything out. But what we did touch base on is a topic that we've been needing to talk about. So thank you again for coming on. And why don't you go ahead and tell everybody one more time about your project, where they can find you, where they can follow you, listen to your content, read your work. Go ahead.
So look up the Bitcoin Takeover podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you can, leave some feedback, because that's the most useful way of understanding to which extent I'm helping you. But at the same time, you have to understand that it's an intermediate level podcast. You're not going to hear me ask people, so what is Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin? And all of these questions from newbie podcasts. It's more about what people do in the space and what they're building and why it's worth looking into. It's pretty valuable, I think, for people looking to invest into companies and projects, because they can discover something new that they were not previously aware of. And I do have about 6 episodes in my backlog that I need to publish. But also, I work on this open source magazine. I used to work for Bitcoin Magazine, but I never got to publish for the actual printed magazine, so I made my own. This is my 3rd annual issue that I released. It's called Breaking FUD. And the concept is that you have the 10 most common misconceptions about Bitcoin, such as security vulnerabilities, such as government regulations, maybe price volatility and mining boiling the oceans, and all of these narratives as suggested by ChatGPT. I basically took them from ChatGPT in a list, and I wrote an article without ChatGPT to debunk what's being described there. And I think it's a pretty nice project, with all due modesty. It has been reviewed by a few people and it was positive. And it's open source, so you can download that for free on the Bitcoin Takeover website. For the short version, you go to btctkvr.com. I bought that domain for convenience because Bitcoin Takeover is kind of long. And you go to the magazine section and you find Breaking FUD in the digital version, which you can download, or in the GitHub version, where you can get every page and you have full permission to copy, modify, print it yourself, even sell it. I don't care. As a consequence of this open source ethos, you can find it for sale on the Shop and Bit web shop, and they have it for about 10 British pounds. It's also delivered in the US with no import taxes, as far as I understand. So you can get it from there, or you can also get it from shopinbit.com in Europe. And if you use promo code BTCTKBR, you get, I think, a discount for it, and also a discount for paying in Bitcoin. So you basically shave off a few euros just by using a promo code and paying with Bitcoin. I think at this point I'm done shilling. I do a lot of work in the space. It occupies most of my waking hours. And I also want to do a new and fresh and interesting magazine for next year. And spoiler, it's going to be about the first year of Bitcoin. Kind of like a historic introspective into it. And yeah, you can follow me on X or NoStar or whatever platform that you use. I post daily shorts from my podcast on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and I lost track of the platforms. I just cross-post everywhere. And that's it. I'm done chilling. I hope you found what I said tonight interesting.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely be including some links in the description of our YouTube channel if anybody wants to follow up on Vlad or see what he's doing. Thank you again, Vlad, for coming on the podcast. And if you're Bitcoin Maxi, if you're a Christian, whatever's bringing you to the episode, we hope you enjoyed the content. Go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought. If you have any opinions on anything we talked about, we had a wide range of topics this episode for sure. So feel free to discuss in the comments, and we will see you next episode. Have a great one.